This is Rosen Institute's Your Law Firm, where we discuss law practice management, marketing, and new technologies to grow your law firm. Here's your host, Lee Rosen.
6 years as a digital nomad lawyer. The last time I updated you on our nomadic existence, we were in Seoul, South Korea, hiding out from COVID. Well, we're still hiding out, but we've developed some so far adequate virus avoidance skills. We've made it through another year with a bit of luck, a lot of COVID tests, and our masks firmly settled on our faces. Making our lifestyle work under these circumstances has been challenging, and we've had to adapt to protect ourselves and to protect others. Thankfully, we've been lucky so far and are alive and well. Sadly, that's not true for millions of other people. We are cautiously optimistic that this will end at some point, but much of the world is still living under a pretty dark COVID cloud. We try to make the best of awful situations. That has been true throughout our journey. This adventure has been filled with ups and downs. This year, during the chaos of the pandemic, we lost track of a guy we'd been talking with about once a month via Facebook Messenger. He's a tour guide that we spent 3 days getting to know in Axum, Ethiopia, the Tigray region. Reports of mass killings in the area, simultaneous with his disappearance from social media and complete radio silence on Messenger, left us fearing the worst. We worried that we would never find out what happened. It's hard for us to wrap our brains around the loss of millions from the virus. It's much easier for us to imagine soldiers killing 800 people under the giant fig tree in the small village where our friend lives in Ethiopia. While much of what has happened over the past year is horrible, it never hurts to look for a bit of humor in every situation, even if it is very dark humor. That led me to wonder about the answer to this question. If you're flying in business class, who cares how long the flight goes on? It's an obnoxious question, which I find darkly amusing, but it became our reality for this past pandemic year. The pandemic changed lots of things for us, just like for everyone else. Flying business class, it seemed safer. I'm sure you understand. It's not like we wanted to fly up front. It was the pandemic. In prior years, we'd adopted a philosophy of staying put in a geographic region for quite a while in order to avoid long flights and jet lag and language adjustments. Most recently, that meant spending nearly a year in South America bopping around between countries. But the pandemic sent us back to the drawing board in search of countries keeping the outbreak in check. Quite often, that meant a long flight from continent to continent. That's where the credit card points came in handy, because business class is the only way to fly when the flight stretches from one day into the next, and our fellow passengers could be exhaling a virus. So let's talk about the past year. The past year in a nutshell. We spent an inordinate amount of time consulting the COVID data this past year. We tried desperately to stay out of the way of the virus spread. The data showed us the path, but even with data, we were rarely comfortable. Airports, even nearly empty, COVID-free airports, were creepy. It was apparent that we wouldn't get infected waiting at the gate when we were the only people we could see other than the gate agent who was wearing full PPE, but it was still creepy. The big empty spaces, the silence, the metal gates drawn down in front of the duty-free stores, and the occasional cleaner spewing chemicals from a sprayer. Empty airports were a potent reminder of the threat. It was all very disconcerting. And then, upon arrival in many places, we were quizzed by border police in broken English. Every time we wondered where they might send us if they didn't let us through the gate. Travel for the past year has not been welcoming, festive, or lighthearted. It has been strange, uncomfortable, and off-putting. So let me tell you about our itinerary for the past 12 months. In our mind, our year runs from June 23rd to June 23rd. That's because we started traveling full-time on June 23rd of 2015 on our 25th wedding anniversary. We typically drop back into our old stomping grounds in Raleigh, North Carolina around that date each year before heading back out for another year. Well, we didn't make it to Raleigh back in 2020, nor have we been this year in 2021. We're waiting a bit before resuming our routine of traveling to the U.S. Maybe I'll need to start giving you these annual updates from January to January, since our old approach to tracking time has been broken by COVID, like so many things. We'll see. So where did we start? Well, we started in Mexico back in 2020 in Playa del Carmen. It took us about 20 minutes of reviewing the healthcare system in that area to realize we didn't want to be there if the pandemic panned out as predicted. We took off and flew from Playa to Tokyo on the spur of the moment back in March of 2020. The business class upgrade didn't entirely distract us from the pandemic stress of air travel in those early days. Then Japan and South Korea. We spent about 5 weeks in Tokyo before popping over to Seoul, South Korea. South Korea knew how to do a pandemic. They had it down. I could spend an hour telling you how well they managed the virus. It was amazing, and we felt perfectly safe for 4 months there. In retrospect, the South Koreans handled the pandemic better than any country we visited. They understood early on the airborne nature of the virus and implemented filtration, masks, and other interventions. Their tracking and tracing were stunningly efficient, persistent, and transparent. They took a very aggressive stance on the virus, and it paid off. We were in Seoul when I delivered my 2020 update on our nomadic travels. The South Korean government was encouraging domestic travel, so we were able to enjoy some time at the beach in Busan and out on Jeju Island. South Korea has quite a bit to offer, and we thoroughly enjoyed our 4 months there. Then Scotland. As the weather warmed up in Europe and the virus numbers went down there, we flew, business class again, over to Scotland. We knew we could stay out in nature and avoid people up in Orkney and the Shetland Islands. And the islands are spectacular. Walking through the sheep poop-dotted green grass along the tall cliffs, looking down at the ocean crashing into the rocks, that was all pretty amazing. Then we headed down to London for 3 weeks, and it was apparent that the virus was about to make a grand reappearance in London. We stayed outside and away from people. From our outside tables, looking in through the windows, we could see nothing but packed restaurants filled with diners paying with half-off coupons provided by the government. We decided to hit the road for Germany. It was a stepping stone that would enable us to get into Bonaire, a Dutch island in the Caribbean. So we landed in Frankfurt, Germany, rented a car after the border police let us in, and we promptly pulled over to a bus stop and opened Google Maps. Within 5 minutes, we picked a destination and we hit the road. And after a quick visit to Koblenz, we headed to Dusseldorf, and we spent our time there eating outside in the cold and the rain of October, avoiding the virus and waiting for that clock to tick off 2 weeks so that we would be approved to fly to Bonaire. Again, looking through the windows into the full restaurants, we were reminded of London, which had gone to red alert status right after we departed. It wasn't much of a surprise when the COVID numbers exploded shortly after our departure from Germany. So we landed in Bonaire in mid-October to warm weather and sunny skies. Bonaire was pretty much the perfect place to weather the storm. The restaurants and all the activities were either outside or underwater. And while we were on the island, there were almost no cases of COVID, although the community had recently lost a beloved doctor to the disease. As a tourist destination with nearly zero other jobs, the island struggled mightily with striking a balance between health and the economy. Our sense was that the virus was slowly going to catch up with Bonaire. So after a few months, we left for Dubai. Our business class seats to Dubai were on KLM, which, while very nice, isn't quite as glamorous as Emirates. Nonetheless, we arrived in style in the land of luxury, abundance, and excess. We've now visited Dubai a number of times, and we have friends there, so our visit was terrific. We enjoyed a Christmas feast outside next to the fountain at the Burj Khalifa, and then we watched the building light up for New Year's Eve. The crowds in Dubai Mall told the story of a coming COVID outbreak. It didn't require an epidemiologist to know that all those British revelers were bringing their particular form of the virus right there to the desert. So then Bangkok. We were missing something as we jetted from Mexico to Asia to Europe to the Caribbean and back to the Middle East. Our eldest kid, he lives in Bangkok, and we hadn't seen him in a long time because COVID struck at exactly the wrong time in our travels. We'd been planning on a visit when the virus started spreading and everything went into a holding pattern. Thailand was the first country after China to experience COVID, so they were tightly locked down. We started inquiring about a visa while we were in South Korea, and the responses were all affirmative with smiles and nodding, yet nothing happened during our visits to the Thai embassy. The land of smiles was closed, even if they weren't always so direct in saying so. But while we were on Bonaire, we sensed that the door was beginning to crack open, and it became clear that we could make it into Thailand. After filling out lots of forms and sending several express mail packages to the Thai embassy in Washington, we had our visa. Then, the day before we were booked on KLM's business class flight out of Bonaire, we went out behind the medical clinic to a dirty plastic chair next to the sweltering tropical medical supply dumpster. A nice Dutch nurse came out with a long Q-tip on a wooden stick and jammed it up my nose. It was kind of like business class, but without the beautiful flight attendant, the luxurious leather chair, or the hot meal. Whatever was in our noses met with the approval of the Thai authorities, and we were admitted to Thailand and promptly sealed into a quarantine hotel by men in blue protective gear. On the way in, of course, our noses were probed again, and then again 5 days later, and then again 7 days later. My nose never saw it coming. Then we were given our freedom in Thailand, where we spent nearly 3 months visiting with our kid. We visited mostly empty tourist attractions and enjoyed many meals as the only customers in the restaurants. Thailand, like the airports around the world, was empty. While we were in Thailand, something happened to Lisa's foot. The aerobics she did in quarantine may have been the cause, but it could have been anything. An MRI revealed that her tendon is torn. She was given a fancy boot to wear and told to rest. The medical treatment in Thailand was top-notch, but our visa ended, so we flew off to Iceland, which has consistently handled the virus very well. Upon arrival, we started the journey to find a foot repair doctor, and after waiting nearly a month to see a doctor and to get another MRI, Lisa was finally able to remove the boot. She still has some discomfort, so surgery might be in her future. We would prefer for her tendon to do the right thing by healing itself, but we're not particularly optimistic about that. So looking back over this past year, I'll tell you that over the many years now of traveling, we've encountered very few nomad lawyers. They've messaged, we've talked, and occasionally we've met up, but those interactions have been pretty rare. Most of the nomads we've met are software developers or writers or people who do some kind of online marketing or trading. But COVID brought out the lawyers. With remote hearings, the kids out of school, and clients adapting to meetings on Zoom, the lawyers were set free, and some of them escaped. I've had quite a few calls with lawyers who flew the coop. Lawyers took the opportunity to work from quiet international destinations in the countryside or on the coast where they had good internet and outdoor dining and fewer people crowding the environment and spreading the disease. Some of these lawyers returned home as schools resumed, but some are making the change more permanent. We've been pleased to help some of these folks see that there are so many options. We've learned lessons over this year. All of us have learned more about viruses and pandemics and loss than we ever wanted to know, that's for sure. But most of us have learned some positive lessons along the way. For us, there have been too many to list. One that stands out is the benefit of spontaneity. We're planners. We often planned our travel a year in advance to take advantage of grabbing seats or rooms early so that we could book with points. Planning is great, but it also has its drawbacks. Loosening up a little is always a good thing. At this point, we're pretty spontaneous. The virus has taught us that booking in advance can be filled with disappointments, refunds caught in bureaucracy, and being unable to stay longer than we planned or leave earlier than we had scheduled. Spontaneity has its benefits. We've taken to booking flights in the taxi on the way to the airport. We're waiting to book rooms after we get past the border police. Planning has mostly gone out the window. We're just a small step away from being those people walking through the terminal, seeing that flight to Algiers and jumping on while we cancel the flight we'd originally booked. We haven't done that yet, but it could happen. Maybe we'll do more planning post-pandemic, but we sure won't forget the lessons that we've learned about spontaneity and lots of other things. The pandemic has been quite an experience in more ways than I can count. So to wrap up, some good news. I record these things a few weeks in advance of publication in order to get them edited and ready for you. In the few weeks since I recorded, a couple of things have happened, and I want to update you on those things. The really big news for us came in the form of a text message from Ethiopia at 6:05 one morning. It said, "Hello, dear Lee. How are you? Glad to meet you again. I'm back after 7 months war and genocide in Axum, Tigray." When I got that message, a sense of relief flooded through me. It was great to know that our friend in Ethiopia was alive. We haven't talked very much since his initial message, but I'm sure that we'll continue to communicate and to hear his stories. So that was some terrific news from Ethiopia. In other news, the Icelandic government came through and vaccinated us, which has been nice of them, and it's another relief for us. It's good to have that behind us, and it opens up more doors for our next destination. With the success of the Icelandic vaccination campaign, the masks have come off here, so again, that's a relief. My mother used to say, "The sun will come up tomorrow." And she was right. She's especially right in Iceland, where sunrise today was at 2:56 a.m. and the sun will come up tomorrow. Of course, here, it mostly won't go down since sunset tonight is at 12:04 a.m. Brighter days are ahead, indeed. Until next time, I'm Lee Rosen.
Thanks for listening to Your Law Firm. For more information on how you can take your law practice to the next level, visit roseninstitute.com. You can also subscribe on iTunes. Follow Lee Rosen on Twitter at Lee Rosen